So
Okay.
yeah, basically the video I made was trying to show your accidental left-wing moment, kind of. Usually leftists are anti-imperialists, but you made the argument that capitalists are also anti-imperialist, especially free market capitalism. I became a little confused, right? Because as I've seen online, I've always attributed capitalism to where the means of production are privately owned for profit. But then you pro-capitalists always seem to have shown that you argue that individual rights plays a role in capitalism. Uh, and I'm kind of confused what those individual rights are. But then um, I realized that people make the argument that it's life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and most importantly, private property. The thing I have with that is socialism also protects individual rights. It just doesn't protect the right to private property. That's like the main difference between capitalism and socialism. I think that private property is inherently useless. So I guess to go back to the video, um, I was arguing that capitalism incentivizes imperialism, and oftentimes that imperialism in history has been caused by capitalist principles with the free market. And I could argue also that sometimes imperialism doesn't have to violate any individual rights for it to work. For example, I can go to Iraq, as I mentioned, and I can pay the workers very, very cheaply. That's pretty exploitative, but I'm not necessarily violating the individual rights because it's voluntary exchange, which is a core tenet of capitalism. That's all I have to really say about that.
Right. Okay. So, from my understanding, imperialism is bringing your country's influence into another country through military or governmental representation. And oftentimes that can be for resources. That happens a lot. It's happened with the U.S. plenty. It's happened with other Western countries. It's happened with Russia. It happens today with China. So this imperialism is inherently government related, just like by definition. And with capitalism, like with your definition of capitalism, the means of production owned privately for profit, that's more so the definition of the capitalist means of production, which of course is very important to capitalism. But capitalism itself, as a economic system, as a free market system, isn't inherently doesn't inherently have the capitalist means of production. It does usually, but there's like mutualists who are free market. They're kind of like free market communists, you could say. They support a free market and they support private property rights, but they don't like to have bosses, basically. They don't like hierarchies. So they want to have like worker cooperatives and stuff like that, and have kind of like a form of socialism, but not have it forced on people, have like an actual free market. And so they would still technically be considered capitalist, even though there's no capitalist means production. Now, also, your argument kind of assumes that like capitalism is synonymous with profit. Like I said, imperialism is usually the government, and governments can seek out profits. But we know, like, by neither of our definitions is a government capitalist, or at least not when they're like performing these actions, trying to make profit or whatever. Okay. So that's my position. I don't think that imperialism can be the same as capitalism. I don't think capitalism encourages imperialism. Now I can talk about what you were saying, where a country might go, where like a company in the U.S. might go to another country in Africa or something like that, and start these factories or whatever and pay people cheaply. Now, while I don't want people to be paid cheaply, I do have to recognize that even under these conditions that we consider to be these terrible conditions, it does dramatically improve the lives of the people there. And like in Africa, for example, when they opened up free trade and you had these Western companies going in there, they drastically reduced all forms of diseases. and their lifespan went up by 10 years, and life got significantly better in just a short time span. So the way I see it, with bringing in more free markets with places, even under the worst conditions, it still overall improves the conditions of the people living there. Now, do I want people just using people for cheap labor? No. However, what we have now is their governments over there are extremely restrictive. They're not letting people start their own businesses. And I know a couple of good talks by economists in Africa where they talk about this, how terrible it is for businesses over there, and how even some American charities ruin small businesses. Like there's charities that send over shoes, and they'll ruin shoe businesses because now no one's buying shoes in those areas. And like a charity is still very important, but you just have to work with the people over there and figure out what they need. And yeah, the governments are heavily restricting people from starting businesses. So there's not like that competition to actually drive wages up. And so that's why these companies are able to go there and pay them less. But even then, the way I see it is these people are still getting paid more than they were before, and their lives are still improving, even under the supposedly worst conditions capitalism has to offer.
Oh, okay. So you mentioned that the free market is helping African countries in some way. I don't see evidence of that happening. I could look it up after this, but
yeah, I'll send you something on this afterward.
Yeah, send me something, please. Also, I'm very confused on your capitalist definition. So let's say I support market socialism, which is voluntary for voluntarily every worker is owning the means of production, and we exchange the business itself is not a dictatorship of capital, a dictatorship of the capitalists. It's owned by the workers altogether. Would I be considered a capitalist if I support market socialism? Because
with the way you described it, we're like just someone who supports worker co-ops and supports people going into worker co-ops. Like say you did a bunch of research, which there's plenty of research on co-ops out there. You did a bunch of research and you determined that co-ops were just the best thing overall for the economy, for the people, and whatever. And you want a free market, but you just want things to be set up in co-ops, but you don't want to force. You just want to like encourage people to go in that direction. Technically, you would still be a capitalist. Now, we would lean into just like calling you a free market socialist or mutualist or whatever, just to keep things simple. But by the definition of a free market capitalism, that would still be a capitalist, yeah.
Okay.
So I'll just kind of explain my definition real quick. So yeah, I go by like a majority of the academic and economist definitions, which is a free market with free competition, which means private property rights, essentially. So not necessarily no regulations, but regulations must be based on private property rights. Like, for example, pollution. It doesn't mean there's no environmental regulations, but if I'm polluting this area and it's affecting like this person's property and damaging these trees or these people's lungs, then I'm affecting them. And through the respects of private property rights, I could be punished for that. Or in order to do that, I must get permission, and maybe I have to pay people for it, or maybe they'll draw a line on how many tons of carbon I can let out or whatever like that. So it's not necessarily no regulations, but it's the entire system is based on private property rights.
Okay, so my definition of libertarianism is just no government interference with the economics and politically also minimal government interference. So I consider myself a libertarian, but I advocate for socialism. I advocate for collectivism. I advocate for voluntary collectivism, which is the idea that we should all, instead of competing with each other for business, we should all cooperate. I guess it falls under anarcho-communist thought. So how would you be against that anarcho-communist or libertarian, minarchist, leftist ideas that we voluntarily cooperate with each other? Would you be against that?
Not necessarily. Like I'm for a cooperative system that supports private property rights and individual rights. You know, just as long as it supports those things. And like if I wanted to make the decision to have my own capitalist means of production business and I was able to do that under that system, I'm fine. You know, maybe I won't want to do that. But with some of the research I've seen, as far as like the effectiveness of worker cooperatives and that sort of thing, I don't see enough evidence to say like, oh yeah, we should absolutely do that. The evidence is very mixed. I've got a bunch of research on this if you want to see it. That goes over different things. I didn't know you were. I should have asked like what your specific ideology was. I didn't know if you were a market socialist or
I'm
whatever.
a libertarian socialist. So
Right. Okay.
progressive. Yeah. I would argue that free market capitalism always tends to have a concentration of wealth onto the upper class. And when this concentration of wealth, they have more power because wealth equals power. The amount of wealth you have, the reason why we're competing in a capitalist society is that we all want to be materially and financially free. We all want to do whatever we please without the burden of, spending money or we all want to have some sort of material freedom. In my sort of ideology, I want to extend that material freedom and ensure that everybody has access to basically the same material freedom. And also, with this power that these capitalists have in the marketplace and free market capitalism, they can use that power and abuse it. For example, remember sharecropping. That could be totally legal under a capitalist framework, because the sharecroppers, the African Americans who were recently slaves, they could leave the farms, but it's voluntary exchange technically, but they're forced to do it. And I see that happening with the lower class, and I see that happening with the impoverished. I, as a libertarian, I believe that capitalism, and I associate capitalism with authority. And I am anti-authority because in capitalism, the upper class owns the material wealth and controls it. So they basically have authority rather than, a government under state socialism. So, yeah, I just think that authority is bad, and a free market capitalist society would always lead to that unless if we voluntarily have good moral principles and focus on cooperation and collectivism.
Mm-hmm. So, as far as like the collecting wealth at the top, meaning power, I would disagree to an extent because, like I said, the point of like a libertarian government or a libertarian system of law is to have those equal rights. So there's only a limited amount of power those people can actually have. And also, one of our entire ideas is that these people, like these big corporations, wouldn't even exist under actual free market capitalism because you have a lot more competition. And with more competition, there definitely tends to be less monopolies, if any. Usually, the only type of monopoly you'd have is a monopoly of efficiency, and those are usually only temporary. Like, for example, I could point to like when Apple made the smartphone, they had a monopoly on smartphones, and now today it's far from a monopoly. There's so many different smartphones to choose from, and many people make better smartphones than Apple now. So when new products come into play or some new sort of efficiency, then it definitely can create a temporary monopoly. But overall, in a market system, without government interference, that tends to not happen. Like today, we have like Amazon, and they've received massive amounts of government subsidies, and the government gives them tax breaks. Now, I mean, personally, I don't have anything against tax breaks, but when you specifically choose out certain companies to give these tax breaks, and it greatly benefits them over all the other companies, then that's something I'm definitely against because I think they should all be treated equally. And even today, with like the lockdowns have greatly benefited Amazon, lockdowns, which I think have been completely unnecessary, which I'm not going to turn this into a lockdown debate, but maybe some other time. But yeah, so the government has like repeatedly benefited these large corporations, and so our idea is that it would be a lot more balanced out. And a lot of us even lean towards, we want more like freelancing and small businesses. Like that's what we support. We really support freelancing and small businesses, definitely not corporations. That's just a big misconception about libertarians a lot of people use these days. Now, I have actual data on this as well. There was a guy at Harvard, and he did this study. I can, if you want me to, let me see. I'll just screen share this real quick.
Okay.
Just to show you my little graph. All right, so right here, I don't know if you can see that, but the second biggest contributor to corporate profits is regulation and lobbying. And he did this whole study looking at regulations and lobbying, which these corporations often lobby for more regulations. And I'll send this to you later if you want it.
Oh, okay. So basically, I'm trying to say that competition, right? This competition aspect will still create an upper class, the business owners and corporations, and a middle to lower class, called the working class. There's people who actually work for the business owners and companies. Now, I guess corporations would be very limited under a free market capitalist system, you say, because of this competition aspect. I would argue that competition actually can make things worse a lot of the times, because when companies compete, they compete for profits, and in order for companies to really gain more profits, a convenient way to do that is to lower the workers' wages. So when capitalists like you say that competition would reduce the wages of the working class, or would actually increase the wages of the working class, I think it's the opposite. Companies are competing for profits, and they'll do that through a competition of lowering wages. So therefore, capitalism incentivizes imperialism, because it incentivizes companies and business owners to look onto territorial expansion, look for more labor supply, and pay them cheaply. And technically, they can exploit them. This is happening right now in China. Most of the products that you have are made in China, right? And the idea behind that, these Chinese workers it's a huge supply of them, causing the price of labor to be paid. It's very cheap for the business owner. This can be very exploitative. It's the reason why my main point here is that capitalism relies on a impoverished class, or not necessarily impoverished, but it relies on the lower class, and it has a tendency to exploit the working class and make them make as much as they can to survive. And I also want to ask you, what do you think of the work or die thing, right? Like, should individuals be forced to work, or and then, like, if they don't work or choose not to work, or if they're unable to work, should they deserve not to not receive help from society? I want to know your viewpoint on that.
All right, so on wages, I would disagree there. This kind of goes back to what I was just talking about, and something I was about to mention, actually. So Amazon raised their wage to $15 an hour, and shortly after that, they started lobbying to raise the overall minimum wage to $15 an hour. And this was because they knew it would harm their competition. Because with competitors, if they're unable to pay these higher wages out of nowhere, then they're going to have to let workers go, or they could end up going out of business altogether. And that's one of the big things with some of these regulations. I have another study on like environmental regulations and how putting in these certain environmental regulations that corporations lobbied for, it actually harmed competition, and therefore there's less jobs and stuff like that. So
Wait, quickly, can I ask, what competition does Amazon have? They're pretty close to a monopoly right now.
Any local businesses wherever they are. Amazon is mostly online, but still local businesses are a big thing, because people can just like go outside and go to a local business real quick and purchase something. And Amazon wants them to go online and purchase it, even if it's going to get there the next day. And then other big retailers like Walmart and Target, which this bill was specifically targeting places like Walmart. I can also send you the article. I'm gonna have to remember all the stuff I need to send you. I don't think it will be that hard because I have notes. But yeah, I'll send you the article talking about how Amazon was trying to lobby in order to, and there were some economists who looked at it and showed how it would hurt their competition. And this is just something that's very common with corporations lobbying for more regulations. Now, as far as wages go, like I get what you're talking about with profits. It makes sense, right? Lower wages means you're making more profits. However, this is just like a kind of a surface level analysis. In reality, if you're not paying workers enough and you have all of this competition, then they're just going to go to someone else, and now you don't have workers. Also, paying workers more and giving them more benefits greatly increases productivity, and greatly increased productivity also increases profits, and increasing PR and all sorts of stuff like that. That's why companies today put a lot of effort into this stuff. Not all of them, certainly. There's companies that rely on the government to make up for it, like Walmart. They rely on the government and food stamps to make up for their low wages. But when you actually are forced to compete in a free market, and in that case, you're not able to just pay people whatever, because they actually have an option to go to someone else. So we see that today, like over 97% of Americans are paid more than minimum wage, like wherever their local minimum wage is. If this was true, then we would just see people getting paid the minimum, which would be minimum wage. But it's not true. And especially today with like a lot less competition, it would be much easier for them to do that. But it still doesn't happen because people just won't work for you. And if you have no workers, you're not going to make any profit. Now, as far as work or die, I think every system is work or die to an extent. There has to be someone working or everyone will die. If it's other systems that are more socialistic and where they view it as, oh, people don't have to work, then there's still people who have to work. There's still people, it's just people have more burden on them for the people who aren't working. Now, capitalism doesn't have to be a work or die system. You have charity and self-sustainability and stuff like that. I don't think someone just deserves to die because they're not willing to work. I certainly think people who can't work should be taken care of by society, and I think they would be. But I think every system is inherently work or die.
Okay, so I would argue also that you said that many workers are making above minimum wage. Was it like 97%? Is that what you said?
It's like 97, 98.
Okay, so my main point still stands. Capitalists, they try to take advantage of the working class. They try to make them pay them amount so that they can keep coming back to the capitalists. They pay them amount like barely over the amount that the cost of living is. This is why 80% of workers right now, they live paycheck to paycheck. I can send you that study. And the reason why is because of, low wages. They can bear, it's not like there's a myth, right, where it's the choices of the workers that cause them to live paycheck to paycheck, like money mismanagement. But you also have to consider the idea of the contradiction in capitalism, which is that everybody wants to be rich, everybody wants to be successful, but capitalism can't operate like that, because not everybody can be rich under a solely individualist capitalist society. The reason why is because, well, obviously, like if everybody had the same money supply, inflation would happen with the businesses, and they recognize that because partially the prices of the businesses are determined by the incomes of the consumer. it has something to do with the demand. So that's what I would argue.
Yeah, supply and demand. I know which study you're talking about the living paycheck to paycheck. I think I did a video analysis on that. I mean, it's not like 100% correct, but I mean, I don't have to vehemently defend the United States economy. Like, obviously, I'm against it as well. You know, there's plenty of issues I see. So, I mean, either way, I don't really need to. I don't think that really significantly affects my argument. But yeah, I mean, I think that certainly people with power and the people looking for profit are looking out for their best interests, but the idea of capitalism is to take people looking for their best interests and turning it into benefiting other people, right? So you have greed, like you want to make this money, but in order to do that, you got to benefit millions of people and make their life significantly better. You know, like one example I like to use is like Bill Gates. You know, he created Microsoft and all this technology with his companies, and he changed the lives of billions of people, literally, like everyone. And that was him going after his passion project. Like all of it wasn't even just looking for profit. You know, there's still people who do these things just because that's what they love doing. But you know, going after his passion projects, going for profit, you know, doing stuff that's benefiting him, and then it greatly benefited so many other people. But then he started a charity and he still benefited a lot of people, you know, specifically trying to help people, but it wasn't nearly as many as when he was looking out for his own self-interest in a way that benefited billions of others. And you know, people talk about unethical people like Bernie Madoff, for example. Bernie Madoff wasn't happy. You know, afterwards, after he got caught, he talked about how he felt. Like he just wasn't happy. These types of actions where you're benefiting yourself in order to harm people or by harming people, it just isn't good for you. So this is kind of the whole idea of doing what's good for you and benefiting other people at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's the whole idea that, you know, if people start businesses, right, like Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, all of them, they're beneficial to society because they create, you know, jobs. Without them, I guess there wouldn't be like any jobs. But the problem I have with that is that doesn't justify their large amount of power they have in their companies. I like Bill Gates is getting all his money, all of his power off the backs of the workers in his company, right? And he didn't really it's not justified for him to get all of that money. It's a myth with capitalist meritocracy. You know how capitalism is supposed to be a meritocracy, but he's gambling on risk. That's how he got all of his money. He didn't work for all of it. He risked all of it. And I find that not that good, because I believe that the workers as a whole should own the means of production and should all benefit from the risk that Bill Gates or the workers should all have an equal say of the company. That's what I believe. And also, along with the myth of a meritocracy in capitalism, you have to recognize that there's no equal opportunities for people in capitalism. I mean, I guess everybody has some sort of an opportunity to succeed, but the opportunity is not equal. It's different for everybody, because obviously people can grow up in a low income person with a person can grow up with their parents being low income and they wouldn't have enough money, especially in a free market capitalist system. They wouldn't have enough money to not as much money to succeed like a person who grows up like a child under Jeff Bezos, for example. I am kind of struggling with my thoughts right now, but do you like get the point of what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I get the point. I think risk is definitely very important, though. Like one example I like to use is, you know, say you're starting a new company to make cars, right? And it's going to take like 5 years to actually produce these cars. and then sell them at the end of the 5 years, at which point you'll make the profit. So how it's done now is you're going to have the capitalist, determining he's going to take the risks to invest all these things into the company for the next 5 years until he finally makes a profit. Because this isn't something where you're going to be constantly making a profit, as with some businesses. So that's very, very important here. So during that 5 years, he can pay his workers with the money that he's built up, weekly or bi-weekly, and through the money they're getting paid, they're able to sustain themselves. And at the end of that 5 years, if these cars don't make a profit, he takes a huge loss, and the workers have still benefited either way. They've greatly benefited because they've been paid this whole time. They've been paid to live. They've been able to live. In the case of if it was the workers themselves trying to do this, you would have to have all of them some way building up enough wealth without being capitalists to actually be able to do this. And then even if they do, at the end, if they don't make the profit, then they've lost everything as a collective. It's not one person losing everything, it's a bunch of people losing everything. And so, with the share of the profit spread out, we also have to remember the share of the loss is spread out. And that's something I'm very concerned about, because while a big share of profits might greatly benefit people, a great share of losses is really, really bad. So I'd much rather people getting less profit than people end up with a high possibility of getting nothing. And there was another thing I was gonna. I was gonna use another example. I kind of forgot about it. I'll let you talk since there's a bunch of fire trucks. I'll mute myself.
All right, I guess I'll add on and say that your example literally proves how capitalism is not that efficient of a system, because not only like people, individuals, in order for individuals to, get the profit they're receiving, because obviously, like, you may believe that there's no surplus value that is stolen from the laborers to the capitalists, but there is a surplus value. All the work is being done by the laborers to make the product, but a capitalist pays the workers some amount, and then they steal the surplus value, and they pay the workers amount and make a profit based on the products that he or she sells, and that creates a surplus value. It's the amount of profit the person makes minus the amount that they're paying the workers as a collective. So the whole problem with markets is that there's risk. There's the utility of the car that they're producing in your example is determined through I guess not really through a subjective theory of value, right? Because nobody really wants to buy the car, so nobody's really paying enough for the cars that you're trying to sell. So in my sort of libertarian socialist system, right, the profit motive is non-existent. The resources that every car that's produced is used for the benefit of society as a whole, not just to be sold. That's one of the inefficiencies I find with capitalism. It's all about profit, and with this profit, cars may not be sold. So there's a risk involved, and either the business owner or the people who's working are not going to benefit. Also, you have to keep in mind that in your example, the workers may work a while, but then they get money, and the business owner also gets money, but then the business owner takes all the losses. But you also have to realize that the workers are not going to have a job anymore once that business is down. When they don't have a job, they need to find another job. And sometimes finding another job can be really hard under a free market capitalist system, unless they're, and it's especially it's hard for finding a job in a free market capitalist system if you're poor. And most workers that work those kind of jobs under companies are relatively poor and rely on those paychecks. You see, the problem with with your example as a whole, I also say this again, is that it's contradictory. people, the business owners, they're paying the workers just enough to live, and it's in the best interest for the business owner to not pay the worker as much, because of course the business owner can take a risk, and paying the workers would more and more would add on to the amount of money that he will lose as a whole. It's an oversimplified example that you're using, and I guess that the workers, they're only getting paid enough to survive, and like barely paying enough, and like once that happens, they're not gonna have a job, and they're not gonna have resources to find another job. So it's both. You think that the capitalist is the only one suffering, but in reality, it's both the capitalists and the workers.
Yeah, I mean, in my specific example, maybe the company would go out of business and they would lose their jobs. But ultimately, like, my point still stands because they were able to have a wage that entire time, a steady wage, a guaranteed wage. And that's one of the main points. Yeah, even today, there's companies which just don't turn a profit some weeks or some months or some years, and they still stay in business, and the workers still get paid consistent wages and guaranteed wages. However, the owners are the ones, taking the losses, and this is just a common thing that would always happen under any sort of market system, whether it's libertarian socialism or capitalism. And under capitalism, it's just you have this guaranteed wage, which is greatly beneficial to the workers. Even if they lose their job, you still had that guaranteed wage for all of that time, and you still aren't taking any actual loss. Like you lost your job, yes, but you're not taking an actual like financial loss. You're not absolutely losing out on anything you've invested, and that can still create problems. Trying to find another job and stuff like that. But still, that's ultimately minute compared to losing everything in a failed business.
But I would add real quickly that you may lose your job, and that's really, really bad, especially when it's a free market capitalist system. There's no government welfare or welfare systems, which is why Nordic countries, they use welfare systems, and it's been beneficial. In a free market capitalist system, when those workers don't have a job, they receive no assistance. How are they going to find another job? They're lacking in the like they can't pay rent, they can't pay food. It's going to be really hard for them. So the loss of the business is going to be spread upon both the worker and the capitalist. Also, the capitalist can just gain new advancements. I know it sounds simplistic, but it truly can. So, yeah, you could continue.
Before welfare, like in the early 1900s, they actually had things like poverty insurance and unemployment insurance. So you're still paying like taxes to the government, and you're going to be making that money back, whenever you're on unemployment. So it's essentially the same thing. It's just you're able to voluntarily choose if you want to invest into this sort of insurance. So I mean, these things would still exist. I definitely think people would invest into them. Like, I mean, there's still things that are somewhat like that today that people invest into, and they were certainly pretty popular back in the early 1900s and very useful as well. So I wouldn't say there's like no sort of, what's the right word, like a safety net. You can still have safety nets within free market capitalism, and again, I think there would be much more competition and much more opportunities to go into, whether it's freelancing or plenty of jobs to go around. So like, yeah, I mean, I certainly won't say it's no issue at all to be unemployed. I mean, that's certainly an issue, but I think it would be much less of an issue in a free market capitalist society than you would think. Now, my other thing I was going to mention was you talked about contradictions, which I did sort of already address that when I talked about how in reality, like in theory, the contradiction thing does make sense. I would agree. But what we actually see happen in reality is it's more beneficial to the capitalists to treat the workers well and to actually pay them more. Like today, you can get away with it because they don't really have another option. They don't have another business to go to because all the other businesses have been run out through not being able to afford high regulations or high minimum wages or whatever it might be. Whereas under a free market capitalist system, you absolutely have to treat your workers the best you can, or you just won't have workers. They'll go on to someone else. And then also, it makes them more productive. Like, I mean, there's plenty of it's millions and billions of dollars invested into the research on how to get workers more productive, and companies know this. I mean, there's people whose entire jobs are to go to companies. Companies hire them, and they come in and tell them how to make workers more happy, because happier workers means more profits for you. So I disagree that it's really this contradiction between classes. And in fact, I think there's more contradictions within classes themselves. Like, for me as a worker, it's more beneficial for me for all the other workers to be paid much less than me, because if they're paid much less, then products would be much cheaper, and it would essentially make me be able to afford a lot more and get more of what I want. And of course, the contradictions within, that goes without saying, contradictions within the capitalist class, the competition. We've talked plenty about competition. So yeah, I mean, that's how I view it. I don't think there's some inherent contradiction between the working class and the capitalist class, or whatever one you want to call it, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. So I disagree with the whole historical materialism aspect.
Okay. Well, I also mentioned a main contradiction, that everybody wants to be rich in a capitalist system, but not everybody can be rich. This is why in a capitalist system, there's a hierarchy on decision making, but oftentimes it's a myth of a meritocracy, right? You can have parents that made really bad decisions, and you can grow up in an impoverished neighborhood or a very poor neighborhood, but you didn't do anything, so you're at a clear disadvantage to everybody else in the capitalist system. So there's a contradiction here between like wanting to be rich, wanting to be wealthy, wanting to have material freedoms, but people like not being able to, even though they work their butt off, right? And obviously, if you're a worker, you can't really be a rich person yourself, because capitalists usually try to pay you the amount that you're gonna be sustaining off of. They usually try to pay you a livable wage, or maybe even more. And so basically what happens is basically workers are not going to be sustained by, or like the workers, they're going to work their butts off, and they're not going to be rich, as what capitalism promises, as what like the myth of meritocracy promises. I'm trying to change that with a solution of libertarian socialism, to where if everybody works, everybody gets like the main resources that society produces. And libertarian socialism is a broad term. I'm not really a supporter of market socialism. I'm kind of undecided, maybe more towards like anarcho-communism, maybe. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hold on. I'm just trying to remember exactly what you said.
It's a contradiction.
Okay, yeah. Like even today in America, income mobility is pretty decent. I think it would definitely be much better in a free market system. Like a majority of millionaires are self-made, and generational wealth, a large majority of the time, doesn't even last like 2 generations. I think people are just inherently going to be unequal, and there's just not really a whole lot we can do about that. Like, even siblings turn out like vastly different. Like usually the first child or only child is going to be vastly more successful. They usually have a higher IQ, and like on the International Space Station, everyone there is a first child or only child. Most NASA scientists are first childs or only childs. There's just these inherent inequalities with everyone. And I think people should definitely be treated equally, but I don't think we should really expect equality to come out of such inequality, such inherent inequality. Now, I mean, certainly equality is something that's great, but when there's a certain amount of realism we have to have when looking at it. And I certainly love to have income mobility. I think our income mobility is pretty great in the United States, like I mentioned. I had another point that I was gonna bring up. Oh yeah. Okay, so I think people wanting to be rich is actually a good thing. I think that's a good motivator for entrepreneurship. So like in Yugoslavia, when they went into more of like a market socialist system, their entrepreneurship dropped drastically because there was no longer that promise of being able to be rich. There's no longer that innovation because people really strive and innovate to be rich, or sometimes plenty of times it's just to help people, but you just can't really afford it without some sort of promise to be rich afterwards. And also in Yugoslavia, their unemployment rate started to go up, and people started going to other countries for work. At one point, they had a very large portion of their population just working in the bordering countries because people just didn't have the proper incentives to work. So, as far as like wanting to be rich, I think that's actually a really good incentive. And we're gonna have like 5 more minutes here or so. So if you want to kind of wrap up your position, I think this was a good conversation.
Yeah, I guess I'll wrap up my my thoughts on this. Basically, my main point is that capitalism encourages greed, encourages selfishness, and what ends up happening is the material wealth is going to be concentrated by the hands of the few, and not concentrated to the whole of the working class. I think that we should have a collectivized system that incentivizes not only individual success, but collaboration and kindness and empathy towards other people. And yeah, and also capitalism as a whole, like it incentivizes corruption and greed, as I said, and imperialism can happen due to capitalist principles, but I guess in a total free market, I like from what I've learned from you, in a total free market capitalist system, it wouldn't really be happening because of, I guess, individual rights, the protection of individual rights, but you have to realize also that when there is power concentrated in the hands of the few, they can change things and they can influence the law. But I think you're a minarchist, right? They can influence the law. They can influence a lot of things, and it can cause corruption and greed. I think we should do the opposite of that. So that's my overall position.
Okay, I'm not gonna worry about going over too much. I think I went over like a lot of my positions in the actual debate, so we can kind of wrap it up. I'll make sure I send you the stuff. I know I need to send you the thing about the about Africa, the improved conditions, and then I need to send you. I'll send you the stuff on regulations, increasing inequality, and increasing corporate profits. I feel like there's one more thing. I don't remember exactly what it was. If there was one more thing, I guess I'll try to remember what it was. But yeah, I'll send you those. And if there's anything else I want to send you, I'll go ahead and do that as well. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up. I don't think this was a boring conversation, so I will be posting it. And then, you can share it on your TikTok or Instagram or whatever, have people come watch it. I'll also share it and have people come watch it if they want to. But yeah, it was great. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, I'll send the 80% of workers of paycheck to paycheck stat too, I guess. But
oh yeah. That's the other thing I was thinking about. If I can find that that kind of analysis of that, I'll send it to you. But yeah, I wasn't like too super worried about that because I don't really like vehemently defend the United States economy. But yeah. All right, I'll go ahead and wrap this up. So goodbye to the 0 people that are watching.
Yeah, it's okay.